Hello and welcome to the Con Couple. I'm Richard,
I'm Caroline.
and we go to a frankly confusing number of cons every year.
Confusing.
Confusing.
This week we have a special guest, though.
We do. Say hello, special guest. That's all you're going to get out of her.
It did wake her up, though.
It did wake her up.
Sorry, Emma. Yeah, this is Emma, our dog. And as I think I mentioned last week, we went to Cleveland Pet Expo this week.
Which has absolutely nothing to do with Cleveland Fan Expo. They just have kind of similar names.
Unlike last week, in which we were con drunk, which I want to emphasize is not actual drunk in any way, shape, or form. It's just when you have a con high. I think this week we're just kind of actually a bit tired because we're recording this at 2 p.m. So.
Yep. And I've been yawning for the past couple of minutes. So I think we're... I think it's good that this is a slightly lower key weekend.
Slightly.
Slightly.
We did wake up at 6 to go to the grocery store, don't ask.
Yeah. And then went to this pet expo on the way back.
So this is kind of a different type of con. As you can tell by the fact that we're recording at 2 p.m., it's a con that's a bit shorter and a bit lower key. So we're probably going to spend some time talking about this today. And then we're going to talk about just general tips for going and finding cons, like what to bring to cons and stuff as kind of the second half of this episode, since there's not really a lot of material to cover about the general con. So if you're interested in that, stick around after we finish reviewing the con. If you're not, you can stop the podcast. It's not that big a deal. It's not like we have sponsors or advertisers or anything like that.
Yep, and we have we're getting about a consistent 10 to 12 listens an episode. But at least
I don't
one
think
of
you're
the...
supposed to tell them that.
Yeah, it's fine. At least one of them is me listening through it just to make sure it's uploaded properly, so, you know.
I didn't know you did that.
Yeah.
We're high quality here.
Oh, yeah.
So Cleveland Pet Expo is a bit of a different type of con. There are a lot of cons that are kind of like these that tend to be more vendors hall or specialty vendor focused, where they're really focused on I guess local artisanal goods or a particular theme. In this case, it's just pets. So it's basically a large exhibitor hall with a bunch of pet products and pet demos set up.
Yeah. Which the other thing you will notice about this kind of event is they're usually a lot cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas for the furry convention we were at last week, how much were the tickets for that? Close to 100 each?
They're about 70, although I did buy them early.
Yeah.
And bigger events, as I mentioned before, they tend to have tiered ticketing, so the earlier you purchase, the cheaper it is. With this, it's a flat $15, and that gets you in for the whole weekend if you would want to go for the whole weekend. We only did this as a one-day convention, though, because it was very fun, but there wasn't enough there to hold our interest for multiple days.
Yeah. So, this is going to be a less expensive kind of event because they expect you to go in and spend a bunch of money in the vendors hall. And that's absolutely fine. I do not feel like I think we got our money's worth quite comfortably.
And as evidenced by the fact that our dog is currently in the car with us, they let you bring your dog.
Yeah.
So, can, I think, bring any type of pet, because we saw some other pets there that were not dogs. They also just allowed people to bring in. Somebody had a turtle they were rolling around in a cart. It was great.
Yep.
Named Sheldon, because of course it was.
Again, Sheldon and Shelley are the two most common turtle names for obvious reasons.
It's like how if you have a pet pig, they're called Hamlet, because that's funny, I guess. People need to be more original with their pet names.
Says you, whose pet is named Emma.
She came with that name.
That is fair. And it does suit her.
It does. So this was held in kind of a generalized convention space up in Cleveland, as emphasized by the fact that Cleveland Pet Expo is in the name, near the airport.
Yep, specifically it was the International Expo Center in Cleveland, which I didn't realize at the time why it was called the International Expo Center. I'm assuming it's because it's right next to the airport.
Well, I do find it interesting that Cleveland Fan Expo calls itself an expo, because it seems more like a Comic-Con than it does an expo. Whereas the thing we went to this weekend seems expo to me, where it's primarily a vendor's hall. Its main focus is on vendors, and it's basically a bunch of people either demoing products or trying new products or selling local stuff like that. And that tends to be a lot more when I think of it as, or what I think of an expo as, than what Cleveland Fan Expo is. So I don't know why they went with that name. It's a bit weird. Yeah,
I sort of know what you mean, but at the same time, you and I do agree that Cleveland Fan Expo is also very vendor hall focused.
It is vendor hall focused, but it's not demonstration focused. Because I generally attach expo just to anything that is basically a product demonstration. So chocolate expo, you're going to get a lot of chocolatiers. Also, that sounds awesome. You should have one of those. Yeah. Or farming expo, you're going to get a bunch of stuff about farming. And that's generally how I've associated the word Expo more than
Yeah.
I have with like what Cleveland Fan Expo does.
I would agree. And this particular convention space at the same time as the Pet Expo, sort of across the hall, was also hosting a sewing expo, which again, I guarantee you we didn't go in, but I would be willing to bet good money was basically the same. You know, a bunch of people selling sewing stuff, showing stuff, maybe demoing techniques, that kind of thing.
And yeah, it was about, I think half the space was dogs, half the space was sewing. They did have it pretty clearly divided, and a lot of people, or helpful signs were around indicating where dogs and other pets were and weren't allowed to go, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And we did have to sign a waiver to get our dog in, but it was otherwise free. And the waiver is just standard, like our dog's not going to bite anyone, and we're not responsible for your dog getting injured or stuff like that. But it's pretty standard for this type of stuff.
Yeah, we've seen that kind of waiver before. They're extremely common and standard. You could either print off a copy off their website and fill it in before you turned up, which is what we did, or they just had a stack of them by the desk at the front if you wanted to fill it out there and then.
Yeah, you could also buy tickets in advance, which we elected to do just because it saves a bit of time, and that made check-in relatively easy.
Yep, a little bit of a queue to get into the parking, and the parking itself, there was a lot of parking. But only effectively 2 lanes to get into the car park, which is causing a little bit of a bottleneck, and $12 for parking.
Which is a lot given that tickets are only $15.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad. Like we have paid worse for parking. Again, it was a lot given the length of time we were there, if I'm honest, but we could potentially have stayed all day if we wanted to, so, yeah. Not the best parking, but not the worst either, I think is the honest assessment. Like, it's fine.
I mean, it's aggressively fine for what it is. This is less than half the price of what we normally pay to do like a con, inclusive total cost. So I'm not going to complain that much for the fact that we only spent like an hour and a half there. And keep in mind that's in part also just due to the fact that we have a small dog, and our small dog is she's not exactly a social butterfly of a dog. She gets overstimulated and overexcited and kind of scared in new situations. So in order to be fair to her, we wanted her to go so she can, get free samples and a bunch of doggy goodies and compete in a very cute competition that we'll describe shortly, but we didn't want to overwhelm her, so we didn't stay terribly long.
Which again, I think we kind of pitched it at about the right level for her and right level for us as well. Like, this wasn't an event that we were planning on sort of, getting here super early, staying super late.
And keep in mind, because it is an expo center, there's no attached hotel. I imagine because they did have some animals on display and stuff like that, there was a plan for setting them up and taking them home and taking them up and down. But other than that, you would just drive there, and there was pretty much no option given where it was other than to drive there. So but parking would have been the only option if you were a visitor.
But it is near the airport, so I'd be willing to bet there's probably a lot of hotels fairly close by.
If you wanted to exhibit or something like that. But this isn't, I think, the type of thing that you would probably visit from terribly far away.
No, this does strike me as again, we drove for 2 hours to get to this, but that's kind of normal for us. We're a bit crazy. I suspect most of the people there probably came from Cleveland and the Cleveland area.
And we are somewhat motivated by the fact that our dog's pretty picky when she comes to treats. We found these really cute pigs in a blanket treat in the UK when we were there over Christmas that she just adores. And now all other treats are just paled in comparison to those because she wants those and we obviously can't get those. So we wanted to go to this to kind of find other treat options.
Yeah, and we did buy her a few bits and bobs. We'll see if you like any of these things, Emma.
Yeah, part of the issue is because she's such a small dog. Treats either last for 2 seconds because we can only give her the tiny ones that crunch up quickly, or the big flavored rawhide bones, which she does like, are just too big for her. So there's not really a long-term chew for small dogs. It's been a hard thing for us to find that she likes.
Yeah, we should probably actually explain what kind of dog Emma is, just so people So Emma is a 12-ish pound Dachshund mix. We don't know exactly what's in her genome, but everybody who sees her
guesses something, and we pretty much always tell them, yeah, we think you're right, regardless of what they say.
Yeah. But one of the most common guesses is a lot of people think that she might have some Papillon just based on her ears.
And Papillon, Pomeranian, I've gotten Chihuahua. I pretty much just say yes to pretty much anything people say because I don't want to be rude.
That is fair. But again, Small dog. She's comfortably ensconced in your lap right now. We spent half the con carrying her because, again, she was asking to be picked up. It still amuses me that we saw a dog that was at least 5 times her size also doing the jump up to be asked to picked up thing. Except they were going up close to their human shoulders as opposed to their knees.
And it is worth noting that she is a service dog, but she's only trained for certain environments, so we only label her as a service dog when she's in those environments. Like, she's trained to perform service at home and is trained to travel through an airport without any problems. And I 100% trust that she can and does do that. Like, she knows sit, she knows basic commands, but she does get overwhelmed in certain scenarios. So because she's not trained for those scenarios, she's not a service dog in those scenarios.
Particularly scenarios involving a lot of other animals.
And again, keep in mind stuff like that one is in keeping with you. I'm not going to go on this basic
You don't
rant.
need to
I don't
go
need
off on this
to.
rant.
It's frustrating because I don't look disabled and because my service dog doesn't look like a normal service dog. People think that she's not trained. And if she is displaying any behaviors that are uncomfortable or inappropriate for an environment, you should absolutely call me out on that because I'm bringing a dog into an environment who's not trained. But if you otherwise just see me holding a dog that's sitting in my lap and just obeying basic social order, please just leave the two of us alone. Because we're not doing anything wrong and she is clearly trained in that circumstance.
Yeah, we have the paperwork that does declare her a trained service dog.
And she has some formal training. It's just she's never really been able to get over that hump of like kind of the difficulties of dealing with a lot of other dogs.
Yeah. But yeah. So should we talk in a little more detail about the sort of the actual expo itself?
Yeah.
So getting in was pretty straightforward. We were lucky enough to actually find a parking spot relatively near the front door, which I think was just pure coincidence based on the fact that somebody had obviously just recently left. I'm not going to, that was luck, nothing more than that. But even if we hadn't had that particular swing of good luck, I don't think we'd have been walking for more than a couple of minutes.
Yep. And then we got inside. They did have a nice person directing traffic because the way that the cars had to go were also the way that people had to like walk into the building. That person was super nice. There was a clear crosswalk that people could cross into.
Yep.
Got inside and stuff was mostly, thankfully, clearly labeled, so no one accidentally walked into the sewing part. That would have been awkward for everyone.
Yeah, we sort of walked forward, saw a sign, and was like, okay, do we need to go this way? Then we realized, no, that's a sewing expo. That's probably not us. Oh, look, there it is. Yeah, so that was absolutely fine. And again, we done our pet waiver, so we were able to just walk up, scan the QR code that that got emailed to me.
Hand them the pet waiver.
Yep, which just went in a box.
And you could have done all this when you got there. They did have a ticketing thing that was on the other side of the venue hall. You could have gotten tickets, and they also had a station where you could fill out your pet waiver if you brought a pet. But we did all that in advance, just so it was a little bit cleaner and quicker, and it took us like 2 seconds to get in.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. They gave you a wristband, so that if you wanted to go out and come back in, all you have to do is walk past and get my wristband. And I'm assuming if we wanted to come back tomorrow, we'd probably want to keep the wristbands on.
Yes, although I do think if you lost them, they probably could just scan your QR code again.
I suspect so.
We probably would if we wanted to come back tomorrow have to reprint off her waiver form again.
I suspect you are correct.
If she, or at the very least, we were taking her with us.
Yeah. Which again, hard to know for certain, but I suspect that will be.
Well, now that we have knowledge on how to get her to win that dog race, I'm just saying that we could come back and really.
Yeah. So that would. Should we talk about the dog race?
I think so.
So yeah, that was the only event thing that they had on that we really sort of attended.
They did have several events on. They were, because this is more of an expo style format, it's similar to kind of a state fair where it's more just kind of like you walk up and see stuff as opposed to like formalized events. But they had dog agility that they were just doing in the middle of the floor that they did, I think, throughout the day with dogs racing. They also had a little track that you could put your dog on where they just ran like a kind of motor mouse around the outside of it, and you could put your dog on to like chase it. And there was like a line you could go in. I think it was free. I didn't sign up for.
I think so, but I'm not 100% certain. They also had a big tank of water that dogs were doing like running leaps into to get a toy that was hanging X distance away.
It's really cute when the dogs were already in the water and still trying to get the toy.
Yep, that was fun. But yeah, And then the thing that we actually got Emma to compete in was the wiener dog races, which is pretty much what it sounds like. You get a hot dog costume, you put your dog in the hot dog costume, and then they race.
Yep.
It takes about 20 seconds for each race.
Pretty much. It depends on how. Generally, with most races, or I think the two that we attended because we were in one, there's like maybe one dog that gets the concept and does a good job, and the rest are all just kind of crossing the line when they feel like it. So it's about a solid minute of just good chaos, but it's fun.
Yeah, in this case, I think Emma got screwed over by the fact she didn't realize where you were.
Yeah, I tried to call her, but I don't think she could really hear me.
Yeah, it was quite loud. So I suspect if you'd like walked over to the box with us, then walked to the opposite side of the field where she could like pay attention and see you, I suspect she would have done quite well.
Yeah.
Instead, she was trying to go back the way I'd brought her so that she could go find you again.
So yeah, eventually I just kind of walked down to where you guys were and then ran across the field and she ran after me. Like, she didn't win, obviously, at that point, so it wasn't like cheating or anything. I was just trying to get her to finish the race. And she did. And she was really proud of herself for doing it. I think mostly because we pet her and gave her a lot of attention afterwards. So she was proud of herself.
Yeah.
And it was also free, which is great.
Yep. And again, it was also, so they were officially doing one race at the top of each hour. But we turned up at the 1 o'clock time slot and it was quite busy. And they ended up deciding, no, we've got enough wieners here that we can do a second race, which is the one that you participated in, Emma.
Yeah.
And I think that was a good decision on their part.
And because Emma's a Shire dog, it also let us like see how the races worked and stuff like that to like make a determination if it was going to be too much for her or not, which it was not.
Yeah. But yeah. So again, that was well handled on their part. It was very silly, but very cute and fun. But other than that, it was basically just a case of wander around and see various stalls and buy you some interesting dog treats, Emma.
But I do find that that one event I think was at least well run. They did multiple races. They were also pretty they basically just said any dog that was like vaguely dachshund size could run. So Emma's definitely at least part dachshund. She's got the body build of a dachshund.
Yeah.
But they were pretty open about just letting any dog who really wanted to do it run, which was super cute. So.
And yeah, you didn't hear this, but they basically had a bunch of different sizes for the hot dog costumes. So it was just a case of, which size do you need, which is going to be the best one for your dog. And it worked pretty well and pretty cute.
One dog did poop on the field, but it was an AstroTurf field, so
and its owner
had bags.
Its owner immediately cleaned it up. It was fine.
Yep.
Again, you go to a pet expo, that's going to happen, but mostly it was just an excuse to see some really cute animals, like a lot of dogs, a couple of cats, and there was also a bunch of
rescue organizations were around that you could either adopt or donate to, including Skunk Safe Haven, which does Skunk Fest. They're not associated with marijuana or drugs at all, but actual living skunks.
Skunk Fest, we went to Skunk Fest last year.
Yeah, we might review it this year if we go again.
Yeah, Skunk Fest
just takes place in a park. They crown a king and queen and prince and princess skunk. There's a lot of varieties of skunks. They had some of them on display there. And if you've just seen in general exotic animals, you had some people there that were showing them.
Yeah. So this event actually had a small family of capybara. And if you're not familiar with the capybara, it's the world's largest rodent, and they're adorable.
And they're also extremely chill.
Yep. The capybara is friend to all animals. Because for whatever reason, nothing hunts them. Like, there are photos of capybara just kind of hanging out with crocodiles.
And we say family, we mean family. There were 2 adult capybara, which we think were male and female, and 1 baby capybara, which is apparently called a joey, which I did not know until this expo.
I think I knew that somewhere in the back of my brain, but I sort of know what you mean. But, again, they were very... That person overtaking us did not need to rev his engine that aggressively.
Yeah. We would probably be cursing if we weren't a...
no cursing podcast? Yeah. But yeah, we should probably clarify the thing we'd like to clarify at each podcast that we frequently forget to until the middle, which is, yes, we are recording this in our car.
We're using lapel mics. I, the person who is not driving, am in charge of all the button pushing. All he does is talk.
Yeah.
With both hands on the steering wheel, so we're in keeping with all state laws.
Yeah. Just a little disclaimer there, because it's useful to have. But yeah. But no, they also had, again, the guy who was wheeling around the tortoise.
They had a whole like reptile area near the back with a bunch of different reptiles at it, and just like an ongoing reptile show that went from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. where they just brought out a bunch of different snakes, which was very, very cool. There were a
Yep.
lot of kids touching snakes and stuff like that. All of it was safe, adult supervised, and none of the animals I want to emphasize that we saw this weekend looked stressed out at all. They all
Yeah.
seemed pretty chill and pretty happy to be there. And keep in mind, this is an exhibition that lasts 3 days, so even though it might be a more high intensity experience, I can tell everyone there cares about the animals and won't let them handle more than they can handle.
Yeah. Like I guarantee you, there were other people like us who had a dog like Emma who, could take it for a little while, but not a vastly extended period, and probably did exactly what we did. They went for as long as their dog was comfortable and then left. So yeah.
So yeah, the reptile area was pretty cool back there. They just had snakes and boxes also that were just kind of chilling out.
Yeah, there was a very large snake in a very large box.
It was mostly open. It was only like shut on one side.
Was it?
Yeah.
I did not even notice that.
I thought about opening it on all sides just to cause mass chaos.
Again, there were many adorable danger noodles.
Mm-hmm. And a bunch of babies who wanted to touch Danger Noodles, which was adorable. And all the dog owners I thought were also really respectful. They understood different dogs' limits. They asked to pet Emma and were appreciative that she was a Shire dog.
Yep. And again, there was also a wonderful dog we saw that was just in a sort of stroller type thing that was just sticking out, barking.
Yeah. It was a tiny dog about Emma's size, another dachshund that was just barking at all the other dogs,
It was great.
Yeah, because it was so tiny and it was barking at all the large dogs.
There was also this giant bunny rabbit that we saw that was, like sufficiently large that everybody thought it was a dog until they saw the head.
Yep. Just like chilled out. And they also had baby goats that were very cute and very
attempting to headbutt each other but hadn't quite figured out how to yet.
Yeah, they were pretty much play fighting in their pen. And then when one of them was like napping, the I think person who was in charge of that exhibit like took the other one out and was like getting it to headbutt its hand. It was very cute.
Yeah.
With the capybara exhibit and some of the other animal exhibits, you could also, most of them had like a fee you could pay that was pretty reasonable, like $10 to $15 to like pet the animal if you wanted to do that, which also gives their rescue money, which is pretty cool.
Yep. We did not do that purely because Emma is a jealous puppy.
Yeah. But it is worth noting that all of these, I think, that we're using exotic animals were primarily rescues. And they brought animals that I think were comfortable being handled and around a lot of people so that they could support other animals at the rescue who weren't like that, which is pretty cute.
Yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment. So yeah, do we actually have that much else to say about this particular convention?
And venue was fairly well laid out. They did have, I think, a relief area for dogs somewhere, which is pretty cool. They'd let you bring your pet. You could bring any type of pet you wanted. Vendors ranged a bit. Like there were a couple of vendors in that exhibit that had nothing to do with dogs. That was a bit confusing.
Yeah, the chiropractor was the one that had me raising an eyebrow, but
There's also apparently a dog-like subscription food service.
Yeah, it's run by, is it HelloFresh?
Of course it is.
It's one of those like meal service box companies has now branched out into also doing like mail order dog food.
I really feel like the meal service box are going to go the way of Loot Crate relatively soon.
Quite possibly.
Because it feels like they're grasping at straws now. I'm sorry if you work in that industry.
Well, again, you've used them in the past.
I've used them occasionally, but part of the problem is like they charge you like half price or less than that for like your first week, which is a good and decent deal on what I'm willing to pay. And then if you continue using them, it's like $15 a meal, and it's just like I'm not going to pay $15 a meal. That's not really reasonable.
Not for everyday eating.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was that. But yeah, should we talk briefly about what we got the pooch?
Yeah, so again, they had a lot of different vending stalls, couple that you would think dog clothing. I'm trying to think if there were any other ones that were like super unique that we passed.
There was various sort of like artisanal stalls for like pet themed art and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they had like some collars and some stuff like that. A large part of it, though, as you can probably tell, is just you can go around this expo center and see a lot of dogs and other unique animals. Some cats that are walking on leashes, a lot of animals that you want to adopt. So it was a pretty cool center. And Emma even made a friend after the wiener dog race.
Did she?
when we were like playing with her in her lap, that other dog came over and sniffed the treats that we got her, and then she was like, "No, those are mine." And then she
Yep.
sniffed it for a minute. She didn't growl or anything though.
Yep.
She's a good dog.
She is. But again, also I love the fact you dropped into the Emma voice there, because of course any pet owners out there know that if you're talking in the place of your pet, you have a specific voice you use for that, because you know what they sound like.
So we were pretty much on a mission to get long-lasting dog treats for small dogs. So we got a couple versions of that. So at one stand, this person like was actively making treats while we were getting them, which was pretty cool. And they had a dog that was helping them, quote unquote, make the treats.
Yeah, by helping them, we mean clearing up the leftovers.
Yep. And this was a puppy. It was very cute and just kind of sitting there and wanting to. It had 2 treats of its own, but those weren't as good as the treats that were currently being made. So
yeah, so
you got it.
Yep. Just making sure we're going off to the right.
So at that one, we got her kind of a wrap bone thing. So on the outside, there's a cookie, then there's a rawhide bone, and then in the middle, there's peanut butter.
Yeah.
Which they explained to us how to like make it a long-lasting treat too. They said to freeze it to like make it even more long-lasting for your dog, which we'll definitely do. But they were making them while we were there, which was pretty damn cool.
Yep.
So.
And they did basically say if you want to reuse it, just get some of their peanut butter and just regular peanut butter and just refill it effectively. Which is nice to know. It won't have the cookie on the outside at that point, but yeah, we'll see if you like them. We also got some pigs in blanket things that don't look quite as good as the ones we got in the UK, but I'm willing to give them a punt, see if she likes them.
Yep. And we got some mini bones that aren't rawhide because she doesn't like plain rawhide. There's also like controversy around it. Please don't send us angry dog posts. That I think she might like. So those were kind of the 3 things we got. It was pretty easy to get through the vendors. Everything was pretty easy to set up. Everyone was very nice. So I had a pretty good shopping experience there.
Yeah. Again, good amount of space. There was a food court type thing at the back, which had like a sectioned off area you could have your dogs in. Though the selection of like food that was available in that sectioned off area I thought was a bit limited. But but it was right next to a area where you weren't allowed to take your dogs, and I didn't try this, but I'm willing to bet that if I'd basically left Emma with you, gone over to that section, got myself some other food, then come back and sat down in the dog-friendly section, I don't think they would have had any problems with that.
Yeah, and you would have had had 2 people to pull that off, but most people who were there with their dogs did have more than 1 person with them, so they probably could have managed some version of that.
Yeah. But again, I'll say this, the no dogs past this point signs were all very, very clear, which was good.
But yeah, I crossed off my bucket list of wanting to get Emma into a wiener dog race. They were super accommodated about that. Yeah. I've always kind of wanted to do one.
Well, we were going to do one last year.
And then we got COVID.
Yeah, so we had to cancel that weekend plan.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
But other than that, expos, we might talk about this as kind of a transition into topics about cons generally. Like, it helps to go to expos if there are like specific artisanal products that you want to buy that you can't really either find on the internet or need to like handle or inspect to know that they're going to be like the quality or thing that you want.
Yeah.
And in this case, that worked out pretty well because we knew we wanted very specific dog treats for our dog. It'd be hard to find those specific dog treats online, and the expo had a lot of people who were selling products like that.
Yeah. And in particular, expos are good if you're looking for like small batch artisanal handmade kind of stuff.
Although there will always be like somebody there who's trying to sell you like plumbing or electricity or this. There's these same 5 like multi-level marketing schemes that always seem to show up at expos and state fairs in ways that confuse me.
Yeah. Some of it does seem very random. As I say, the chiropractor was the one that confused me, but there were a couple of others who I was like, why are you at this pet exposition? Okay, fair enough.
But it's fairly easy to spot those versus an actual shop, so you don't need to worry too much about it.
Yeah.
We were also given, one shop just gave us this like giant, so a lot of shops were offering like free samples. One shop just gave us like a bag. It was just filled with like dog food.
Yep.
It was like a very big free sample.
Well, again, that makes sense if you've got a big dog, but like for a dog Emma's size, that was a lot of free sample.
It was, especially since it was called dog caviar.
Yeah, I did notice that.
we will give it to her. We might say in a future podcast how she reviews stuff.
Yep.
You have any comments on Pet Expo, Ems? Did you like it?
That's a good review, Emma.
She's got to earn her, profit.
Yep. I mean, if you count the treats she's getting as a result, she's getting paid better for this podcast than we are.
Yeah, by a lot.
But again, we freely admit this podcast is mostly a journaling device for ourselves. Like, if people listen to it and enjoy it, that's absolutely fantastic.
Like, if you are one of those 10 listeners, or I suppose more if this somehow takes off randomly, we really do appreciate it. Like, it's nice that you're entertained by this, so thank you. Yeah. And with that in mind, you want to transition to talking about cons in general, tips for cons, how to choose cons, stuff like that?
I think so.
Okay.
So this is effectively part 2 of this episode.
Yep.
So, as you may have gathered from the past few episodes, if you've listened to more than one of them, there's a lot of different kinds of cons.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing you would want to do if you're deciding you want to go to a con is trying to figure out if a con is going to be what you think it is.
Yeah. And if it's going to be the right con for you.
Yes.
So, classic con-goer experience is you are interested in X thing. You find a con for X thing, you go to it.
That's not how we operate, but that is how most people operate.
That is how most people operate. So, for example, I'm a really big sci-fi fan. So I might go, I wonder if there's a sci-fi convention. Research, find one, go to it.
Fancons.net, or sorry, probably fancons.com. But if you just type in fan conventions into Google, you should be able to go to fancons.com, which would be the first thing that comes up. And that'll basically have stuff dated and listed, and you can click on type of convention on that website. You can click on year if you want to look at like past conventions. It filters by current year. And you can also do dates, so present date or future date going forward. And it lets you filter by country or continent. So there's a lot of different ways you can filter and look for at least some of the major cons in your area. Keep in mind that some smaller cons might not be on that list sometimes, so you might need to do for more digging on that. Like Pet Expo we went to this week was definitely not on that list. I don't think Concoction, which we went to, was either. So you do need to kind of look at different sources, but that's kind of a go-to, particularly if you just want to go to a big generic con and a field that you're interested in. That's a great way to look at it.
So the kind of major fandom cons you're likely to encounter that aren't hyper-focused on one specific franchise tend to be sci-fi cons, anime cons. You're going to find there's a lot of anime cons. Furry cons, steampunk cons,
Comic cons.
comic cons.
And a new genre that's actually relatively recent, at least in terms of it becoming more than just a couple conventions, is horror conventions.
Yeah, horror conventions are starting to get big. And again, you tend to find there's a lot of those in October.
Yes.
Can't imagine why. But again, the general difference you'll find between a con and an expo.
So I was trying to think. Those are the main types. There's also, you can filter by fantasy on fancons.com. Fantasy, I find, just tends to be kind of lumped into other stuff, though. It doesn't tend to be as much of its own convention generally as a genre.
Yeah. So yeah, fantasy and sci-fi frequently get paired up.
And fantasy just kind of goes with a lot of other con schemes, so it tends to be less of its own thing. But those tend to be kind of, I think, the major ones. There's also more localized Comic Cons that are smaller. Is that what you were going into? Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to... So again, there's kind of a difference between a con and an expo, which we've kind of talked about a bit already, which is a convention is something that they kind of expect you to be at least for quite a few hours. Maybe it's going to be a multi-day event. They frequently will be running multiple days, but they expect you to get there on Friday and stay there till Sunday. That's pretty common.
They will generally have panel rooms that go on where people talk about the stuff. How many will vary a lot. They will, most times, although not always, we'll talk more about this, have a con schedule for panels. They will typically, across cons, have a tabletop and video game library, although again, not every con. And they'll typically have, I'm trying to think what else they have generally other than...
Those are kind of the main things that most cons have. And they will have a vendor's hall.
Yes.
But it's not usually the focus.
At Comic Cons, it definitely is.
True.
And I do think it is at more and more conventions these days.
As a general of thumb, the bigger and more corporate a convention is, the bigger its vendors hall is, and the more they want you to spend money there.
Yes. Because for corporate conventions, which we talked a little bit about on previous episodes, they tend to be profit driven, so they're going to focus on vendors hall and celebrities as their two big main things because that's how they make money.
Yeah. Whereas for your smaller conventions, those are usually non-profits.
So this is, again, there's kind of 4 quadrants to this because there is non-profit, for-profit, and then there's big and small.
Yeah.
So you can have big for-profit cons. That tends to be the majority of for-profit cons. Also tend to be these very large conventions because they want to make money and quarter the market.
Yeah. So GalaxyCon, Fan Expo, those are big corporate cons.
Yeah. You can also have, I guess, non-profit big conventions. There are still a couple of those, although they tend to be less common than the corporate ones.
Yeah,
So TECO, which we'll probably go to later, is definitely one.
Anthro-Ohio.
The furry community has a lot of those, I will say, probably more so than any other demographic right now, because they, for whatever reason, are not being taken over by corporate because
furries have a rep.
Partially that, partially it's just they don't have a celebrity focus, so they can't market as much. And also the fact that they do most of their, I think, money goes in the realm of not safe for work art. So,
yeah, a lot of it does, but it's also one of the reasons that furry cons are as successful as they are is they are very vocal and very aggressive about raising money for charity.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take that element away, I suspect they're not going to be anywhere near as successful.
Yeah, that is a very big part of, I think, furry cons and identity and reasons to go to furry cons.
Yeah.
But there are also a couple of anime cons that are that big that are non-profit. They tend to be the 2 major categories. Comic cons that big tend to almost always be for profit these days. And you also have a lot of non-profit small cons. There's tons of those, like a lot. They're great. I want those to continue, and I hope that they stay at the level where they're able to do what they're able to do, even with inflation. And I suppose technically you could have a for-profit small con, but I've not seen any.
Yeah, they typically, as a general rule of thumb, if you want to be a for-profit con, you have to have enough seed money going in that you can get some big celebrities or some other thing that's going to draw in a lot of people. So yeah, they tend not to be small for-profit cons generally don't tend to exist, I don't think.
I'm trying to think of one that we've even been to that's close. Sometimes a convention in its first year will have lower numbers. That's what Animate was the first year we went to that in Columbus.
Yeah.
It definitely did not have the numbers that they wanted, but it was not a small convention even then.
Yeah. No, that was a big con that just had a slightly disappointing turnout.
Yes. So those are kind of the basics of the various sizes of cons and the various ones you could choose to go to. And I will say, all of them have their place. There's definitely a place for corporate cons because they're unfortunately, at this point, they're pretty much the only cons that draw celebrities. That's in part just due to, in the past decade, I think, larger non-profit cons, because again, they're volunteer run, have mishandled celebrities a little bit, so they tend to not have as many of them, although there are still plenty of people who do go to them.
Yeah.
And
I was just going to say, if you're at a smaller con, the celebrities you get are probably going to be a little bit niche, insofar as they're going to be voice actors from some anime or some cartoon or some or somebody who's done a lot of that kind of stuff.
Or at I think even a larger con if it's non-corporate.
Yeah.
Or non-profit.
Whereas if you're looking to meet, I don't know, David Tennant, yeah, you're probably looking at a large corporate con because he's a big enough pull that he's going to get swarmed by fans at a smaller con that doesn't have that
or
level
to stay non-corporate con.
Yeah.
Generally. So it is something that if that celebrity experience is what you want, you're probably best, I think, going big in corporate if you truly want that.
Yep.
We don't tend to do that as much, so we don't have as much advice about how to do it or which cons are best to do it, but that would be where to look, I think, if you want a celebrity experience.
Yeah.
But that's not why we go to cons.
Nope. We go to cons to hear people talk about things they're passionate about.
Stop being a snob.
That was an accurate statement.
I know, but you said it all pedantically.
I love you.
So I do also want to emphasize that even though a lot of people disparage big corporate cons, and we just went to one recently that was not well run, the upside to them is they generally do tend to be quite well run.
Yeah.
Because they have people whose job it is to basically make sure that it works.
Yep.
And how well they do that does vary, but most do at least somewhat care about you having a good time. I am noticing that start to wane a little bit, and I'm disappointed about it. But if you can find a corporate con that actually cares about you as a client, it generally will probably be well run. It generally means that stuff will go well, it'll go off, it'll be according on time. There won't be as many logistical problems, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they do pay people for working at the con, which is also great.
Yeah. Whereas your smaller cons, they're pretty much going to be exclusively run by volunteers.
Okay. I love you.
Yes.
Please be careful when you're saying small versus non-corporate, because they're distinct and you keep interchanging the two words. And
Fair.
It's confusing.
Okay. At your non-corporate cons, pretty much everybody's going to be a volunteer.
Yes.
Like maybe you've got somebody on the board is taking a salary, but that's going to be relatively few of the people involved, if it's anybody. Like Anthro, Ohio is very proud of the fact that nobody who works for that con takes a salary, right up to the guy who's officially in charge.
Which is something that they've been talking about recently, because I've been using some of their media, because they did just grow to about 20,000 people. They're close to that now.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of people to be managing on a volunteer budget at a spare time. So I wouldn't begrudge them if they did take a salary for that, but a lot of cons just don't, even when they get to be that size, which does mean that because it's people that generally tend to have less experience, sometimes the con can outgrow what their management is like.
Yeah. Which again, you do see sometimes. You see a con that's outgrown its venue or outgrown, the amount of programming that they have just isn't enough for the number of people there, because that amount of programming has been fine for the last couple of years, but now they've reached the point where they just don't have enough for the numbers they're now pulling. Mm-hmm. That's going to happen occasionally. And most cons are actually pretty good at realizing, we messed up this year, we're going to need more programming for next year, and things like that.
I would turn the lights on, by the way, because it's raining.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, those can be kind of the differences. That said, non-corporate cons do tend to be a little bit more caring about your experience, not treating you as a number. They tend to have a lot more paneling programming, which we like a lot. And they tend to have more stuff to do outside of the vendors hall and celebrities, which we also like a lot.
Yeah.
Smaller cons also can vary a lot in terms of how much paneling they have. And with smaller cons, we're, again, pretty much always talking about non-corporate cons. Some can have almost as much programming as large cons, which is awesome. Others might not have much at all.
And that's going to come down to a combination of the space they're utilizing and how good their program director is at just, getting people to come in and do stuff.
Also, keep this in mind, size is not the only factor when you're choosing like con comfort. A lot of it depends on size versus venue. Yeah. You can have 20,000 people in a space, and if that space is like the Columbus Convention Center, which we love, it can easily hold 20,000 people. Like, there's plenty of places for those people to go, as long as the con has a decent amount of programming on. That amount of people is going to be in a bunch of different spaces, so it's not going to feel that claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Origins, which we're going to this summer, because all of its events are organized, they have above that or pretty close to that, and it doesn't generally ever feel too crowded unless you're in the main vendors hall area, because those people are interspersed across the whole convention center.
Yeah.
Whereas you can have a con that has like 4,000 people, and if they're all in fursuits and in a small convention area, it can feel really overcrowded.
We should also mention that one type of convention we didn't mention earlier is board gaming conventions.
Yes, we do go to those. I forgot about those. They're another type of convention.
Which are kind of their own separate thing in a lot of ways.
So I would say when choosing convention, a couple things to look for other than just it being to your interest is, one, keep in mind there are people like us who can have fun at cons that aren't to their interests.
Yep.
So if you're somebody like us who's just interested in kind of fun stuff, you can always check the con schedule to see what they're about. Most cons release a schedule at least a week in advance. It's very variable when they actually release a schedule. I've seen some 2 days before a con. I've seen some schedules 3 months before a con. It varies wildly. And as somebody who generally tends to choose cons based on schedules, I would advise them to get the schedule up as early as possible.
Whereas again, there are some that you will not know what the schedule is until you actually turn up and find that they printed off a physical copy of it, and that's the only version of it you're going to see all weekend.
Yep. And for larger, more vendors' holy cons, you also have to keep in mind that the schedule might be kind of loose a little bit. And also look at their space on a map and see how they're doing events. Because some cons, and this is not something I like as a panel person, like to do their panels just kind of in the middle of the vendors' hall floor. And people just kind of stand around and answer trivia questions in the middle of a vendors' hall floor.
I know specifically which con you're calling out for that. I'm assuming you didn't name it on purpose.
I don't know if that one's actually corporate or not, so I'm not sure if I feel comfortable naming it, but I also know that it's not the only con that does that. We've been to a couple that does
We
that.
have been to a couple that do that. But again, it is one of those things you will see that, as a general rule of thumb, the smaller the con, the more intimate it is in terms of if you go turn up on the Friday, you're going to see a few of the same people over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually form friendships at conventions. We've seen it happen. We've made friends at cons.
Yes. Now, we're married and generally not swingers. So,
I love the fact you said generally.
and again, if, somebody in a fursuit comes up to you, I'm just saying, I love you.
Stop trying to pimp me out to fursuiters. Anyway.
I know some people go to cons looking for like a romantic relationship. I can't speak to that at all. My general advice would be just go to the con, have fun. If you happen to make a connection to somebody, maybe friend them on social media and see where it goes naturally, but don't go to a con with that in mind because it's probably not a great way to do that.
Yeah.
Try to aim for friends, and then if you friends happen to organically turn into a romantic relationship later, that's fine.
Yeah.
Unless you're at a furry convention, in which case get on Telegram and see what happens there. You'll figure it out pretty easily.
Dear.
What?
But yeah, so again, it is entirely possible to make friends at conventions. We've done it.
Yep. In fact, a convention we're going to next week, we'll have a couple of our friends at it that we've made at cons.
Oh yeah, they are going to that one, aren't they? Which will be nice. But again, have a plan to have a rough idea of what you're planning to do in the day. If there's what I would say is, if there is one particular thing you really want to do,
Mm-hmm.
plan around it and try and make sure that you're going to be there in good time.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps. So if it's one of the first things in the day, just get there early. That's fine. If it's late in the day, use the vibe of the rest of the convention to figure out how early you need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, when we went to what's the one at the water park called?
I did not hear what you just said.
What's the one at the water park called?
Colossus Con?
Colossus
or
Con.
Colossal Con. I always get the names mixed up.
Yeah. When we went to Colossal, it became pretty obvious that if you wanted to guarantee you could actually get into a panel, you had to turn up in queue about 30 minutes before it was due to start.
At least.
So that was a case of there was one or two particular events we really wanted to do at that convention. We made sure we were queuing in advance for them.
Yep. So do you want to talk about, let's finish up the choosing con section before we get to the at the con section?
Sure.
So again, choosing cons, another thing is just to look at geographic location. If it's your first con, probably go to something that's close to your house.
Yeah. Again, I think up to an hour's drive is probably absolutely fine for your first convention, depending on
where you live. If you're in a city, probably try to find one that's in your city, unless you can't, and then maybe go to the next city over.
Yeah.
If you're where we live, which is in the middle of nowhere, then find one in the next city. The first con we went to was in Columbus.
Yep. Which again is about an hour drive for us.
Yep. And we had no idea what we were doing.
Nope, but we did have a good time.
Yep. Do that, check the schedule. Do you want to talk about things to pack for overnight cons before we move on to what to do at cons?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it, when it comes to packing for an overnight con, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. One, what do you need to sleep?
Yes.
You, for example, use a fan when you sleep because you like the feeling and you like the white noise. So anytime we're packing for an overnight con, the fan goes in the car.
Yes.
and that's going to be personal for you. Do you have a specific, thing you need in order to get to sleep? Bring that. That should be obvious, but it's just good advice.
So yeah, bring stuff you need to sleep, bring food, comfortable shoes. This is more obvious stuff, but I do like to mention it just because. So just the basic things you need. Decide if you're driving or flying. We pretty much always drive just because we have too much stuff to really fly with.
Yeah.
And I would recommend if it's your first overnight con, probably drive just because you can bring more stuff. And it's better to bring stuff and not need it than it is to not bring stuff.
Yeah. And again, if you are, going to be wearing some kind of costume, bring everything you need for that costume.
Yep.
Like, make lists. Like when we are, bringing, say, our Hades and Persephone costume, I have a list of everything that goes in that, whether that be the coat I wear, the crown I wear, the dress you wear,
Tights,
the hoop that
shoes
goes
I
under
wear,
it. All of that kind of stuff, because it's better to have a list than to get to the con and go, oh no, I forgot my hoop, for example.
Yeah, and if you decide you want to cosplay, it can be helpful to just have folders of whatever is included in that cosplay just to make sure you bring all of it.
Yeah.
The other thing to, I think, choose is whether you're going, if you're going to do an overnight con, whether you're going to Airbnb or hotel.
Yep.
Hotel has the advantage of generally being connected to the venue. It is not always, though. Make sure you check. Sometimes it can be across the street.
Yeah. For example, back when, before you and I got together, I actually visited the States for about a week because I went to Combat Con in Las Vegas, which is a sword fighting convention. And that was super convenient because my hotel room, in order to get, I basically went out of my hotel room, went down a corridor, got in a lift, went down X number of floors, and got out straight on the convention floor. Super convenient, really helpful, because that also meant I could, wear my full gear, which, included, fencing mask and, padded gambeson and multiple swords, and I could just strap it all on in my room and I'd get down to the convention floor really easy.
Yeah. It also means in the middle of the day, if you need a break because the con is heaving, which does happen, you can go back up to your room and just chill out till like your next panel or next thing you want to do, which is also awesome. But keep in mind, it's not always attached. Sometimes it's across the street. Sometimes they'll even have a shuttle to take you to the con. And those can be a little bit more cumbersome, particularly if you're still paying high prices.
Yeah.
And that is the one downside to hotels is they generally tend to cost more. And also in my case, and probably in a lot of disabled people's cases, they're not entirely accessible. Yeah. So we don't tend to use them for that reason, just because for my disability, and also just because they can cost up to twice as much as an Airbnb can. But if you're flying, it's probably your best option.
Yeah. Whereas you and I generally tend to get an Airbnb that we usually advise about 20 minutes away from the venue as at maximum, if you can manage that.
20 minutes away from the venue. Obviously, make sure to check Airbnb rules. I always make sure to check that the host doesn't have any ridiculous rules on their website. And keep in mind, if they do have ridiculous rules in a folder in the house and they don't disclose them on Airbnb, you're not obligated to follow those because they didn't disclose them on their website. And if they try to call you out for it, you can basically say these weren't disclosed on the website, so I'm not obligated to follow them.
Yeah. And again, Airbnb is a terrible company, but sometimes you don't have a lot of choice in that. So Airbnbs generally, if you're going to a convention all day, don't worry about finding a nice, super swanky Airbnb. Find something that's going to be within your price range that you can sleep at.
Because generally, when we go to cons, we pretty much sleep there, and that's pretty much it. I also have to eat there, so it has to include some stuff for that. You also sometimes have to eat there, so it has to include some stuff for that.
Yep.
So that's the other thing about cons is consider when you want to buy tickets. So if it's a con you want to go to, it can make sense to buy early because keep in mind the sooner you buy, typically the cheaper it is. The one risk with that is generally most tickets are non-refundable. And generally in our case, if you're a schedule dependent person, you like to wait till the schedule's actually out to make sure there's going to actually be stuff there that you want to do.
Yeah.
So we tend to wait a little bit later to buy our tickets just because we want to be sure that it's going to be like the event that weekend we're going to most enjoy.
Yeah. I would concur with that because again, when it comes down to it, if it's a con you went to last year and you really, really enjoyed, and and you don't need to see the schedules, you'll have fun again, get the tickets early.
Yeah.
No qualms about that. Like,
And most cons, although not all, do still have exceptions for COVID. So if you have COVID that weekend and you send them like a photo, they will refund your ticket for that. But pretty much everything else they will not. So that is a risk.
Yeah. And again, a lot of that comes down to how much risk you're willing to accept and all of that jazz.
And part of that also has to do with structure with nonprofits. For some reason, it's harder for them to refund tickets because of like reporting. I'm still a bit confused on how that works, but it's pretty consistent that nonprofits can't for whatever reason. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. So once you've actually, made it to the convention, and again, if possible, research what the parking situation at the venue is like first.
Yeah, if you're budgeting, keep in mind that tickets and parking and obviously hotel if you're traveling or gas if you're driving are going to be part of your budget. You can also maybe plan a budget for how much you want to spend in the vendor's hall if that's important to you, or for other activities that's important to you as well. Also food.
Also food. Food is important.
So, go ahead.
One thing I was going to say is if you want to set a hard budget for a vendor's hall, bring cash.
Yes.
Any vendor will be happy to take cash, and if the best way for you to budget is to basically say, okay, I have this much cash I can spend at the vendor's hall, and I don't want to spend any more than that, that's a great way to do it. Because a lot of those vendors will also not charge you tax if you pay in cash. It's not all of them. That's not a definitive thing, but it's not an uncommon thing to see.
So generally also the 2 times to buy in a vendor's hall that I would recommend are pretty much Friday when you get there if you see like a unique artisanal piece, particularly at a bigger con, because you don't know if that thing's going to be there all weekend because there's probably only one of it.
Yep.
And if it's not a unique artisanal piece or you're just kind of ambivalent on it, generally on Sunday you can get discounts on stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
So don't ask for a discount. Instead, like ask to look at an item and then see if the person will give you a discount when you're looking at the item is the way to kind of go about that.
Yeah, you might be able to haggle a little bit, but again, if they say no, we don't haggle, don't try and haggle with them.
Yeah, generally I would wait for them to offer you a discount, and if they don't, just accept that they're not going to, particularly if they're doing artisanal good and products.
Again, pay artists what they're worth.
So for ticketing, generally,
I was an illegal U-turn, Sonny.
Be nice to the car.
I am.
So generally, ticketing systems vary a lot depending on con. Some, like, you just have to give them their name and they look it up on like a spreadsheet if you're a smaller con. Others require IDs. Some have QR codes. Some bigger cons, and I would advise investigating this, do early badge pickup, where you can go either to that location or another location the day before the con starts to get your badge. If you're like me and you're not a line person, I highly recommend you do that if you're able to get to that spot at that time period.
So when we did GalaxyCon...
It was Anime.
Oh, it was Anime, was it? Yeah. Sorry, Animate and GalaxyCon are owned by the same company, which is why I occasionally get them mixed up. Yeah, for whatever reason, their early badge pickup was across town in a Dave & Buster's.
They're a big corporate con, so they probably have Dave & Buster's as a sponsor, and the hope was that you would like stay there and
spend money after picking up your badge.
We did not do that. We just were in town. We went to the mall, and then we picked up our badge.
Yep.
There was no one there, and it did save us being in a line the next day.
Yep.
Likewise, do check with cons. They vary a lot on this, particularly if you don't have a visible disability. But if you do have a disability and like legitimately can't wait in lines, like I can't, check to see if they have accessible badge pickup. It varies a lot whether or not they do. It varies a lot whether or not they do, and also listed on their website. But it is worth asking.
Yeah. And again, sometimes it might just come down to you ask a particular staffer who goes, "Let me," who will say some variation of, "We don't officially, but let me help you," and they will. Sometimes this is, we've had, this happened at Origins last year, big line, no official accessibility line. So I went up and I asked the question, and a guy basically escorted us to, the front of the line. Mm-hmm. Which again, I would prefer they just had an accessibility line, but that particular volunteer, I think, handled the situation very well.
Yeah, and keep in mind that generally the people you're going to be talking to, particularly at the admissions desk, are volunteers.
Yep.
They're probably the most overworked volunteers that are at the con, because registration is a tough job, so please be respectful regardless of what's going on.
Yep.
There might be some complications picking up your badge. We've had that happen before where the system just wasn't working right for whatever reason. Be patient with them. They're learning the system too. This isn't their full-time job. And they're generally probably trying to do their best, because that's one of the most thankless con jobs.
Yeah, it really is. Because again, if somebody's going to get yelled at, it's probably going to be them.
Yep.
And they don't deserve it.
They do not. So you have your badge, you maybe toured the vendors hall the first time, you're now in the con. So general tips, if you don't want to spend a lot on food, bring your own food. About 95% of conventions allow that. Some conventions that are in bigger venues will say that the venue doesn't allow it, quote unquote, but no one checks or cares. So if you see that sign and no one's checking bags, pretty much just ignore it.
Yep.
Like the con's not going to care and the venue's not going to police it. We've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah, that's usually because they sell food on site.
And they can't have anyone competing with them.
Yeah. But like if you turn up with your own like sandwiches that you made at home, they're not going to like confiscate them and kick you out of the con for having that.
Yeah.
The only convention we've been to that was doing full bag checks was CincyCon?
Cincinnati Comic Con specifically. And I do think they've switched venues now, so that might no longer be an issue. Because I do think that was a venue issue, not a them issue.
Yeah.
But that said, we did not go back to that con this year because as a person who's disabled and can't eat normal food in a vendor's hall and needs certain like food to take with medication throughout the day, that's a completely inaccessible policy.
Yep.
So we were just like, no, I'm not going back. And it's hard to get a doctor's note for that before anyone suggests that. So, yeah.
So, for the most part, if you want to bring your own food, you can. Otherwise, there is a decent chance there will be some kind of food. But again, as a general rule of thumb, the bigger the venue, the more likely they are to have food.
Mm-hmm.
So the Columbus Convention Center, for example, has multiple different food courts.
Yeah. And in terms of like keeping self-care, the rule that's often stated in cons is, I think, the 6-2-1 rule, which
is 6 hours of sleep, 2 meals, and 1 shower.
Which was done by, I think, a doctor who used to attend cons. I don't tend to like that rule as a disabled person, just because like I can't eat 2 meals a day. Like I just physically can't. I don't on a normal basis. I eat kind of one big meal late in the day because that's the only thing my body can handle. I still get enough calories. I just get them all at once because that's the only way my body can handle it. And at this point, my stomach's trained such that it can't, like, I don't really get hungry in the day like a normal person does anymore.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I know that rule's not meant to, like, call that out, but I think a better way of thinking about it is like I would say an 80-100 rule, where you should do about 80% of the sleep and 80% of the food that you're normally intaking at least, and then 100% of the hygiene stuff you're normally doing at least. Because disabilities are going to vary that up a lot more.
Yeah.
And more generally, just try to treat your self-care as much as you can, like when you're at home at cons, to kind of take care of yourself, is I think a way of thinking about it that's a little bit more accessible to different people.
Yeah, because again, you are going to be doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You are potentially going to be getting up early, going to bed late. It is going to be a big weekend for you, and that's great.
Mm-hmm.
You should be wanting to have fun at a convention. You should be wanting to experience what the convention has to offer. Don't overstress yourself. Don't push yourself past the point at which you can handle it. You're going to regret that the next few days. In particular, there's a reason why the phrase con flu exists.
Yep.
Because A, you're in a new space with new people, which means you're probably getting exposed to new and interesting illnesses.
Yay!
And if you run yourself too ragged, staying up too late, you're also going to knacker out your immune system, which means those illnesses are going to hit you harder.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, just you have to compromise somewhere. We tend to not do the late night stuff because I can't drink and it's less appealing to you.
Yep.
If you're somebody who likes late night parties, compromise by the fact that you're probably not going to make it to panels before noon, and that's absolutely fine.
Which again is something you see at a lot of conventions, is that before noon, especially on Saturday and Sunday, the con is going to be a lot quieter because people are still recovering from the night before.
Which again, as somebody who likes that time period, I appreciate that as a quieter time period. So if you're somebody who wants to experience cons when they're a bit quieter, that's a great time to like go around. If the vendors hall's open at that time period, and they typically are, go in the vendors hall, make your purchases. If you want to go to a panel, it's a great time to go to a panel. Maybe get a good seat.
Yeah. And in terms of kind of planning out your events, be aware that sometimes, again, this is very venue and size of convention dependent. You might not actually be able to get into a thing you wanted to do, whether that be there's some celebrity you can't get at because their line is too long, whether that be the panel you wanted to go to, the room is too full and you just can't get a seat.
Sometimes at some conventions, if they're a bit smaller, there are a limited number of people who are allowed inside the dealers hall at once.
These are, cons are not perfect.
Yep.
And there are always going to be disappointments at any given convention. And it's about, balancing that and going, okay, I couldn't get into this panel, I'll pivot and I'll do this thing instead.
Which is absolutely fair. Keep in mind also if a panel's not to your taste, you can also leave it and pivot to something else. Or sometimes a panelist doesn't show up, so you might have to pivot and do something else.
Yep.
So let's also talk about con meltdowns, because they happen and pretty much everyone experiences them. So what's a con meltdown?
I mean, there's a couple of different things I could potentially describe as that. So what exactly do you mean by that?
I think it can be anything. It's just kind of a time where, like, cons are a big event, emotions are riding high, you're sleep deprived, there's anxiety, and after you might experience a disappointment or sometimes just generally, and I do think everyone experiences this, your emotions are just on high and you can't handle it. And how that manifests could be in a number of different ways. It might just feel like you're too tired to move and you just need to like stay in a spot. It could be like actively crying. It could be anger that you're very careful about like not directing to anyone. It's just kind of any, like, I think, emotional thing. And like we've both had those to some degree or another.
We have.
And we've also met other people who've been having them.
Yeah. And again, if you see somebody having one of those, it's okay to check on them, but if they say, I'm okay, leave them alone.
Yep.
They are most likely doing some kind of self-care, let them do their thing.
And keep in mind, for some people, this can be like active crying. We've seen that before.
Yeah.
Give them their privacy, please. It can also just be like an internal like feeling of just wanting to lay down and not move.
Which again, we've both seen, we've both experienced. It's going to happen from time to time, especially if you do a lot of different events.
So what I recommend is if you can find it, try to find your designated quiet space in a con. Some cons do have quiet rooms that they designate as quiet space for moments like this. And they tend to be kind of hit and miss in whether or not they work, because I've been to some where they're just as crowded as other parts of the con and they're just people talking in them and playing cards.
Which means they don't really work as a quiet space to just center yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if it's a larger space, there is a good chance there's going to be some quiet corner than somebody else that most other people don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we're going to sing the praises of it a lot, but the Columbus Convention Center is a giant space that even during Origins, we have managed to find the odd quiet nook and cranny in that we can just take a minute, rest, reset our mental batteries, do all that jazz.
If you have a car, going back to your car, if it's like reasonably parked, can also be an option for that if you need it. We've done that before. And this is just a time period where you kind of like reset after you experienced a disappointment or somebody said something mean to you, which does unfortunately happen sometimes. Or somebody was being a creep, which also happens sometimes. Like just having a moment to kind of reset after those kind of negative things happen can help a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I do want to emphasize this happens to everyone, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Again, the intensity of it is going to vary wildly from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Or just experience to experience.
Yeah. But I guarantee you, anybody who does cons regularly will have either had this happen or at the very least know somebody it's happened to. Because again, things don't always go perfectly, and especially when emotions are running high, maybe there was a thing you'd been really looking forward to for a long time, and it just didn't go the way you wanted for whatever reason.
You worked really hard on your cosplay and somebody said something negative about it. That doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen unfortunately occasionally, and it sucks.
Yep. And again, your Persephone costume.
Yeah.
You basically every con we wear that to, you get compliments, you get people telling you they love it. But at one point we had one person criticize it. Neither of us have ever really been able to get that criticism completely out of our heads.
Yeah.
Because that's just the way the human brain works.
Yeah.
It's really
I still
annoying.
remember it, even though I've had at least 1,000 compliments on that costume and one criticism.
But it's hard to forget that one criticism.
Yeah. So again, not a regular experience, but sometimes stuff can get into your head. Also at a bigger con, stuff just takes a long time to even go ahead and do. So sometimes you're going through 6 different steps and then the thing doesn't happen and it can be really frustrating. So for us, board game rooms also tend to work as a cool down space
Yeah.
because we like to play board games. And there's a couple games we know. There might also be some chill stuff that you like to do at cons that are kind of more relaxing. Maybe that's like wandering around the vendors hall for some people. It's not for me, but could be.
Yep. And again, like something like a board game room is actually really good if you need to just clear your head for a bit because it gives you something other than the con to focus on.
So it also relates to, I think, con downtime. So as scheduled people, or even as just people who are like doing the vendor hall, you're probably going to have like a couple awkward periods of time where you don't have anything scheduled. So there are a number of things you can do with that time period. One is just rest. Like that's a valid choice.
Yeah,
we don't do that, but you know,
especially if you're staying at the hotel that's connected to the convention center. Basically, okay, the next panel I want to see is in like an hour and a half. I'm going to go upstairs and catch a quick nap and recuperate. Great, enjoy yourself. That's not a bad idea in the slightest.
At a lot of conventions, particularly if you're a fan of cosplay and stuff like that, you can also just like sit down in the hallway and people watch and maybe occasionally compliment people on their cosplay or ask people for pictures of their cosplay. And everyone will love you if you do that.
Yep. And again, point of etiquette, always ask permission before you take photos of anybody at a con, no matter what, whether they're in cosplay or not. Mm-hmm. Most people will say yes. If they say no, there's probably a valid reason. And
doesn't typically have anything to do with you.
Yeah.
I think the only time I've ever declined a photo is just because we were quite literally in a line that was moving and I didn't have time to stop because we had to get in that room right then.
Yeah.
And even then I like ran back after the panel and like got a photo with them afterwards.
You did.
But photos are generally a compliment for most cosplayers, so 99% of the time they will say yes. The only time they pretty much won't, if you're like, hey, you want to do a photo shoot in my hotel room? We're not going to say yes to that.
No, they are not, and they should not.
No. But if you're taking a photo in a public place and just want a photo, they'll absolutely say yes.
Yep. And again, some people will be quite happy to take photos with you, some won't. Again, that is a personal comfort level. Mm-hmm. And you should just ask them, if you've got a specific thing you want them to do, like maybe there's some pose their character is famous for, they've probably already been asked for that pose. They might be willing to do it. They might not. Take the if they say no, take the no. And
also, sorry,
I was just going to say the thing we shouldn't have to say, but we do. Cosplay is not consent. Some cons will actually have this on signs. Just because a cosplayer is dressed in a sexy or provocative outfit, that doesn't mean they have agreed for you to be like provocative at them. Just don't. Be polite, be respectful. That's all you need.
I will say if you are in cosplay, particularly, so most cons I will say, because we go to a lot of them, being of female persuasion, I tend to get hit on. Not all. Furry cons I don't tend to as much, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm the one who gets hit on at furry cons.
But keep in mind, if you're like female, I said femaling alone, which I don't know if that should be a phrase. Sounds pretty incelly.
Yeah.
But if you're by yourself or you're not with your friends for whatever reason while you're at a con and somebody is making creepy comments with you, keep in mind that pretty much any other female identifying person who is dressed in cosplay, we have your back. Like, just come up with us, pretend to be our friends, we'll keep talking to you. And if you can't find anyone like that, go by the cosplay table. And if you go to any of the professional cosplayers that are there and say, hey, this guy's being creepy, they will take care of that.
Yeah, they will help.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes, same goes for official con staff. You can almost always identify official con staff in some way. So for some, they'll all be wearing the same T-shirt. For some, it's
they'll have like a high vis vest on.
High vis vest, different lanyard style. There will be something identifying them as con staff. Mm-hmm. Or con volunteers. And again, if you go up to one of those and say, this dude is creeping me out, then they should, even if it's just something as simple as directing you to their security team, whose job is to bounce people who are giving other people the ick, then that is what they will do.
Yeah. Because you should never feel unsafe at a con, and there's a lot of structures in place to make sure that you're not a lot of the time.
And again, we've had moments like that where again, somebody's being a bit creepy, and generally people, once they realize I'm with you, tend to back off, because again, mostly these kind of people are going to be going after women who are on their own, which is a sad, depressing thing. But I do want to stress it's not a common thing. It's just common enough that you need to be aware that it might happen.
Also, just some general like cosplaying tips. So keep in mind, 99% of the cosplay community is positive. You bought your cosplay online, that's fine. You can't enter it in some official competitions, but who cares? A lot of people just want to see a cool character that they like. If you made it, that's also great. If you have a bigger cosplay, like a ball gown or a fursuit, you probably do want to bring a handler with you while you're wearing it. And also keep in mind, like, how long you're going to be wearing it, what are you going to be wearing it to, and how functional is it going to be for what you want to do that particular day.
Yeah.
And again, if you have a hotel on site, that's great because you can go back and change after you've been in it for a lot of times.
Yeah.
If you're like me and are just stubborn, you just wear it for a very long time.
You just wear the 40-pound skirt around your waist for like 10 hours. So the other thing is that, especially if you're going with a friend and you're coordinating cosplays, if one of you's got a big elaborate costume, the other person, it really helps if they're in a more comfortable, easy to move in costume.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you go in a giant ball gown, I'm usually dressed formally in some capacity. You know, like my Wonka costume, for example, it's a top hat, it's a longish coat, it's a waistcoat, it's trousers. That means I can absolutely still be in costume and enjoy the aspect of cosplaying while also acting as your handler.
Also, keep in mind, if you have bigger elaborate costumes, there probably will just be spaces of the con at certain times of day that you just can't go if it's a larger or more crowded con.
Yeah.
Like the vendors hall at Fan Expo, I can't go on that midday Saturday if I'm in a ball gown. I just can't. It's not feasible.
Yeah.
And I knew that going in, so I don't even consider that necessarily a criticism of them and their space, given that I knew it. But it does mean that I'm limited to do certain things. Also, keep in mind when you're selecting cosplays, generally most. So there's some. One thing I have noticed about con websites is they tend to just copy and paste language from other con websites. It's really awkward. So when they have official policies and stuff like that, they'll just copy and paste. Sometimes even just the rules for cosplay competitions from other cosplay competitions. I kind of wish they would stop doing that, but I guess the other alternative is them just having ChatGPT do it for them now instead. The point with that being, though, is generally most events will have the same rules in terms of what's allowed versus not allowed in terms of cosplay. Just check. With larger events, they might also have prop check if you're bringing a prop, so make sure that you're stopping by the prop check booth just to make sure that your prop gets like a band or something on it that says it's allowed.
Yeah. You know, and that's the thing with cosplay weapons. You know, for example, my Hades costume has a bident. Mm-hmm. I don't bring it to that many cons. I tend to limit it to ones that we are driving back and forth, purely because it's a bit of a pain in the neck to fit it in the car, on top of all the stuff we need for an overnight stay. Whereas if it's a con that's in Columbus that we are driving back and forth to, I'll usually bring the bident, because incidentally, if you're not aware, a bident is it's like a trident, but it's only got 2 prongs on it. But again, the head of that is made out of cardboard. The shaft for that is a painter's pole. And the advantage of that is that's an extendable painter's pole, which means it fits in the car because it shrinks down to about 3 foot long. And then when it's fully extended, it's about 6 and change, including the head. So, that's a useful tip, incidentally. But any con that's doing a weapons check, if the weapon is made of cardboard, you're going to be fine. If it's a Nerf gun, you're going to be fine. If you're attempting to bring actual steel or actual firearms to a con, that they're going to have problems with.
Yes.
The only con I've been to that is comfortable with steel weapons is the aforementioned Combat Con, where everybody was carrying steel weapons. Yep. That was kind of the point of the convention. Everybody knew going in what was going to be there. Whereas I would not bring either of my steel blades to an average Comic Con, or even an average anime con or whatever, because I'm pretty sure they would tell me that is not coming into our convention. Take it back to your car.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that even if your weapon is very clearly fake, you still need to bring it by the props table to check. His bident is very obviously not real in any capacity.
Yep.
But even so...
The head is very obviously made of cardboard that we've spray painted silver.
Yes, but even so, they still want to check it.
Yep.
So just make sure that you're bringing it by, and if anyone asks to inspect your weapon, unless they're talking about a part of your body, let them inspect it.
Yeah, we were both thinking that. I'm not going to lie, I was also thinking that.
So that's some like cosplay stuff. There's a lot of panels on cosplay at most cons. So if you want to get started in cosplay and stuff like that, I recommend you go to those.
Yep.
They're pretty cool generally.
Yep, we went to a couple of Cosplay 101 panels when we first started, and they are usually worth going to because they'll give you some good general advice.
I still go to the makeup panels sometimes because makeup's something I'm still kind of trying to work on. So yeah, those are the basics of like cons, paneling, dealer's hall. Time to leave. That's something we should also talk about.
Yep, time to leave largely comes down to.
We mean by day, so like at the end of the day.
Yeah. A lot of it's going to come down to your own personal comfort, and a lot of it's going to come down to what events are on. So if there's a particular late night event you want to go to, that you want to stay for, you can absolutely do that. Just be aware of the sleep deprivation that's going to cause.
And be aware of when you normally wake up and go to sleep, because it is going to motivate what panels and stuff are appealing to you. Like, generally you can push it a bit later if you want to, but like,
if there's a 2 a.m. panel and you're normally somebody who goes to bed at 8:30, you're probably not making it to that.
Yeah. Just be kind of realistic about what you can expect yourself to do. And make sure that you know how to keep yourself awake to the best of your ability too, whether that's through safe amounts of caffeine. Don't drink 2 caffeinated waters in one sitting.
Yeah, I basically drank the equivalent of 4 particularly strong cups of coffee at one convention, and I'm not somebody who drinks coffee. That was just by drinking caffeinated water. I'm not doing that again. My brain got buzzy.
Yeah, he wasn't in any danger, but I did tell him not to do that.
It felt weird.
Yep.
But again, whatever you're probably going to need caffeine or something similar throughout the weekend. Whatever your preferred method of ingesting that is, whether that be coffee, whether that be energy drinks, whatever. As long as it's something you personally are comfortable with, that's the key.
Yep. Also keep in mind, you want some way to carry whatever you need while you're at the con. So we have what we refer to as the con bag, because we prefer to carry a lot of stuff. That's just a bag I got at an academic conference.
Yep.
They also do have these as like sponsored tier things, because they're meant to carry like merchandise and stuff like that if you get like a higher tier level badge that's above just the average 3-day pass.
Yep.
By the way, with those, I should probably talk a little bit about them. So in addition to day passes, because you can get a pass for one day of most cons, although not all cons, typically Friday is moderately priced, Saturday is highest priced, and Sunday tends to be the cheapest. And if you ever just want to get your feet wet, I actually highly recommend a Sunday badge at a con, because it tends to be the least crowded day unless there's some major celebrity there, like what Fan Expo did.
Yep.
And it's a great way to just kind of go around a con space when it's a little bit less crowded and the vibes are just kind of chill and fun. In addition to that, they have like sponsored level badges. I pretty much always find these higher level badges, particularly at corporate cons, to not be worth it. They tend to be worth it if you really want to support like the convention, and if that's your reason for wanting to do them because you really like the convention and you want it to continue in the future, that's a good reason to get a sponsor level badge. Otherwise, they say that they have like priority seating for events. In my experience, they tend to not have priority seating for events or priority lines for most events.
Yep.
They might for like celebrity autographs, but I don't try to get celebrity autographs. You're mostly just purchasing a bag and a lanyard and a few other things for like a higher tier price point. I don't tend to find them to be worth it most of the time.
Yeah, neither do I.
Occasionally you get access to a VIP lounge. It's just a room with tables. It varies a lot. Check with what you get with them, but I tend to not be into them as a concept.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. And again, a lot of it's going to come down to your budget, what you're comfortable paying, and all of that kind of jazz. Generally speaking, we are, adults with a bit of disposable income, and we're quite comfortable paying for a normal weekend badge.
And I will say at this point, I've considered, because depending on the con, they can be anywhere for, like, I think Galaxy Con sells like a $500 badge that comes with a lot of ridiculous extra bells and whistles. That's like 5 times the price of their normal badge. There's probably no universe in which I'm paying for that.
Yeah.
But occasionally I might have a con that like charges $20 more for VIP. And I might do that if it's a con that I really, really like and want to see succeed. But my reasons for doing that is because it's a nonprofit con that I want to succeed, not because I want any of the extra stuff I'm being given.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of those kind of things.
So to go back to bags, generally just make sure you have a way to carry all your stuff.
Yeah. Now, again, depending on if you are if you have a costume that includes some kind of bag or backpack, that's great. Utilize the bejesus out of that. Otherwise, whatever bag you have, make sure it's something that you can take on and off relatively quickly if you want to take photos. So we just use basic shoulder sling bag. But I have seen people use, like themed backpacks and that kind of stuff.
Some people also use like small wagons that are meant to hold kids if they want to buy a lot of stuff at the vendor's hall.
Yep.
Generally, those are allowed.
Yeah, that one in particular at Origins, we see that a lot because, again, at Origins, people are buying a lot of board games.
Yep.
So they want something that they can just pile a whole bunch of fairly, relatively heavy boxes into and wheel them around. But that also means that, they'll basically go through the vendor's hall, buy the various things they want to do, pile them into their cart, and then they'll take their cart either back to their room or back to their car or whatever, and then they'll come back and do the other stuff they're doing at the con without that.
And obviously, if you have kids, like you might want that just to put the kids in.
Yep.
And that's generally also not looked down upon. Or if you have a giant rabbit, you can put the giant rabbit in.
Yep. Bringing it back to what we were doing today.
Yeah. So bring what you need. We also try to have some stuff for downtime in our bags just because we don't know, sometimes there's an awkward gap between panels, and sometimes we don't always know what the board game library is going to have in terms of stuff that we like, or when it's going to be open, or how crowded it's going to be. So sometimes we bring small games that we can play when we're either waiting in line or waiting for a panel room to open, or just otherwise not near a board game room.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of generic board games in the bag that are things that you and I can happily break out and play for 20 minutes to an hour without any real problem.
Yep.
If you're somebody who has, say, a Steam Deck or a Switch or something like that, and you want to bring that so that you've got something to kill a bit of time if you have one of those awkward gaps, great. You see that at cons all the time. And again, especially if it's something like the Switch, which has a lot of that, Street Pass network connectivity kind of stuff, you are not going to be the only one at the con who's doing that.
Yep, seen a bunch of that. Your phone, a lot of... I haven't checked, but I suspect most cons probably have somebody setting up a Pokemon Go lure. If you want to do that or anything like that on your phone is obviously great. Books are also great if you prefer physical books to Kindle.
Yep.
You can also bring your laptop. Check to see what the Wi-Fi connection is before you do that, because some venues have free Wi-Fi, others do not.
And again, sometimes venues have really good free Wi-Fi, and some their free Wi-Fi is just hot garbage, and you never really know what you're going to get until you get there.
For events and seating, stuff like that, if you require a specific seat, show up to events as early as possible. Most events are supposed to have disabled seating. A lot of them don't. Ask a staff member if you're obviously visibly disabled. I'm sorry if I'm ranting about how inaccessible cons are generally, but
it is a common issue.
Yeah. But otherwise, just make sure you get there early to get the seats that you like a lot of the time. I don't know how to, because I think sometimes people are tickled or interested in the fact that we always sit in the front row. I don't really know how to explain to them that we sit in the front row because my disability requires that I do that.
You're also frequently in a giant ball gown, and having that room is kind of necessary for you.
There's that too.
But in all honesty, I feel like there are times when we kind of use the ball gown as a justification for doing that, so you don't have to explain your disability to them.
Yeah.
Now, wish again. You okay?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, that's some stuff with seating and events. Obviously, for bigger celebrity panels, generally the front seats are blocked off for VIPs, at least at some events and stuff like that. And generally at more popular panels, we just kind of tend to sit out of the way because I need wider space. And in a smaller panel room, that's the front row because it's a little bit less cleared out. In a bigger panel room, it's just kind of off to the side somewhere where there's not a lot of people.
Yeah. And a lot of it's going to come down to venue and weight and guests and all of that kind of jazz. Yeah.
So deciding to leave the convention,
yep.
which I think we got off that point.
We did. So yeah. Ultimately, deciding what time you want to leave and go back to your hotel room, go to your Airbnb, go home, whatever. Ultimately, that is know yourself. Don't push yourself too hard. It's okay to push yourself a bit, but especially if it's a multi-day con, don't completely exhaust yourself on Friday because you're going to regret that the next 2 days.
And if you have to drive, make sure you're safe to drive. We don't attend any drinking events, which is, again, why we tend to prefer to stay off-site if possible.
So is there anything else we need to talk about in that regard?
In terms of what?
Kind of when you leave.
We can talk about leaving the con generally. I'm trying to think if there's any. So we can talk about what to do when you wake up.
Yep.
So when you wake up, determine what time you want to wake up. That's very key.
Yep.
And be sure to be realistic about how long it takes you to get ready.
Yep.
Because generally, you're probably not getting out of the door in faster than 45 minutes, especially if you're wearing a costume.
And again, I find it interesting that your Persephone costume has become our go-to easy get up and go quick costume.
Yep.
Because you can go from asleep to ready to go in what, 25 minutes at this point?
Yeah, I'm practiced at it. But if it's your first con, it's probably going to take you a while. Yep. And also, just it does tend to be more pleasant if you can wake up slow. You're a little bit less stressed.
Yep.
Remember your con badges, particularly if you're staying off site. We tend to keep those in the car whenever possible, just so we don't forget them.
Yeah, because we have had the thing where we were staying at an Airbnb that was 15 minutes away. We got in the car, we drove for about 5-10 minutes, and I realized, oh, bugger, I've left the con badges in the Airbnb, so we had to turn around and go get them. Mm-hmm. And the degree to which a given con checks badges is going to vary wildly, and you are going to have absolutely no clue how much they're going to be badge checking until you get there.
Yep. And that's true of bigger and smaller cons.
Yeah.
It really varies a lot. There's no consistency whatsoever.
Yeah. Some small cons are absolutely militant about it. They'll have somebody badge checking in front of every panel room. Some will just badge check you at the front door. Some just don't care.
Yep. But that said, you should always, always, always pay for tickets because, again, particularly at smaller cons, volunteer run, they need that money to continue existing. If you want to enjoy the con, you should pay for it.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And again, I don't actually think there are that many people at ghost cons. I think it's just one of those things that people occasionally talk about doing.
So ghosting is when you show up at a con without a badge and hang out in areas that you're allowed to get into without a badge. And some people justify this by saying that, the con allows for just anyone who comes into the building to be into those spaces without a badge. That's not the case for a lot of panel rooms and stuff like that. They just don't have enough staff to check doors, and that's okay. It makes it easier for everyone else.
Yep.
And frankly, it's a lot nicer of an experience if they don't have to check a badge. Also, if you're plus 18, make sure you're remembering your ID. At plus 18 cons, they tend not to check IDs because they checked your ID on the way in.
Yep.
But if you're going to any plus 18 panels and you're an adult, make sure that you have an ID with you because I've never been to a con that does not check those for plus 18 panels. They are very strict about that, as they should be. It's
either that or some cons will do effectively a separate IG check. So at Con Alt Delete that we went to a while back, if you wanted to go to a plus 18 panel, you could either get your ID checked at the door, or you could go to Con Ops prior to that, show them your ID, and they would give you, I think it was a black wristband.
Yeah.
That was basically this person has already been ID checked by Con Ops. You don't have to check them every time.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, most cons do full badges. A couple lower budget cons tend to do wristbands, and if you do have a all weekend wristband, you unfortunately do kind of have to just keep that wristband on you all weekend and try to avoid getting it wet.
Yeah, that's kind of annoying if you need to take a shower.
Yeah.
Which is why I tend to prefer actual physical badges.
But they do tend to be more expensive.
Yeah. So again, a lot of that's going to come down to what the con can justify spending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, with most cons, you can also buy tickets day of and just show up. It does take a bit longer, but it is something you could potentially do.
And again, a lot of cons will just sell you a badge once you get there.
Mm-hmm. Generally at cons, we've talked a lot about tips and experience. Cons are also I'm trying to think of how to describe this. I've heard people at panels like these talk about it you get out of it what you put into it, but it is one of those things where you're gonna have, I think, a little bit more fun at a con if you do kind of step out of your comfort zone a bit and be a little bit more in that creative space and make those connections with people, because that's always what makes cons magical to me.
Yeah.
So like volunteering in panels, if you go to a participatory panel, can really make your con experience fun. Just talking to somebody in the hallway about like a costume that you really like keep in mind everyone else is as happy to be there as you are. So like it's a really great place just to kind of start a conversation or make a connection, and that's I think what cons are ultimately like all about.
They are. Even if it's something as simple as just saying, "Hey, I really love your outfit," I think that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's going to be a small moment, but that person is going to appreciate you saying.
Yeah. And also try to maybe try something that's a little bit scary, whether that's like trying a panel or volunteering or something like that you're a little bit nervous about, because it can be really fun to kind of have those fun moments with people. And it's also one of those things like the stakes are low. Like it's a con, everyone's there to have a good time, it's going to be fun. And if you don't like a panel after you tried it, like the worst thing that happens is you've wasted maybe an hour of your time.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of cons for schedules have like physical schedules, or they'll be on the con website. A lot of cons use a lot of different apps to also put schedules up there.
Yep. At this point, I think I have 4 different events apps related to different conventions.
And some have their own app.
Like Fan Expo has their own proprietary app. Others will use things like Inventory and Guidebook and various others.
They have their pros and cons. Like some of them let you like select events and stuff like that, so you can build your own schedule, which is pretty cool. We both tend to really like physical schedules, though.
There's just something like I like pulling out a con book that's been made and reading it through and going, okay, so I want to do this and then this and then this and that. There's something more satisfying about that to me personally than going through and liking events on a event schedule online. But that really is just personal preference.
And sometimes the events will have descriptions, sometimes they will not. Like sometimes the event app or website will let you like click on the event and it'll explain what it is. Sometimes they don't do that.
Yeah, and you never really know what you're going to get in that regard.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time the event description is going to be provided by the panelist. And some panelists are really good at writing, excellent descriptions and tell you exactly what the panel is. And some of them are really, really vague.
Yeah. I will say though, if you do like an event, for at least some of the event apps, you can click on the name of the panelist, and if they're doing other panels, it should pull it up. And if you know you like that person's presentation style, which there are a couple panelists at pretty much all the cons that we tend to like to go to just because we know we really like their presentation style and what they do.
Yep.
You can see the other events they're hosting and maybe go to another one later that day.
Yep. And again, when we've hosted events in the past, we've had people turn up the next day, and say, yeah, we really enjoyed the panel you did yesterday. We figured we'd give this one a punt too.
Which is a huge compliment.
It really is. And again, if you do, here's the thing: if you're in a panel that's got a lot of audience participation, they want you to be enthusiastic.
Yeah.
They want you to take part. So yeah.
So stuff like that can be fun. And if you don't like a panel, you can also like look to see if they're running future panels, and if you don't vibe with that person, you can avoid that event.
Yep.
Which is also valid. Not everyone's presentation style works with everyone else's. Similar with GMs.
Yep. Yeah. We'll talk about that at a later date.
We might talk about like board game cons because they have their own like ticketing system that's even more complicated. I would probably not recommend starting with a board game con if you do like board games, but
I'd say
I would recommend starting with a smaller board game con. Like go to a Catacon. A Catacon's amazing.
Yeah, we did love a Catacon.
Origins might not be the best first board game con.
It was our first board game con.
Oh yeah, we did have fun at it though. So honestly, you forget everything I'm saying. Just go to the cons you want to go to.
Yep.
So we're missing any like major things. We do tend to be pretty panel focused, as you can tell. So we tend to not focus as much on like other stuff.
Yep. Again, I think we've covered most things: vendors hall, budgeting, all of that kind of jazz.
Vendors hall, budgeting, opening and closing ceremonies. So cons have these.
Well, some cons have these, not all do.
They tend to be fine.
A little bit slapdash.
They're not even like. They're kind of useful if the con doesn't have a functional website for explaining stuff, which does happen occasionally, but they mostly tend to just be kind of summarizing the weekend. Sometimes if you like won something in a panel previously, because sometimes they'll have competitions throughout the weekend, they might announce your name at closing ceremonies. You can stand up and get a round of applause if you're there.
Yep. That's
really about all they kind of do. Like they're fun if you just want to sit in a room with a bunch of people and cheer and get yourself hyped, or enjoy the weekend with a group of people that you've been hanging out with all weekend. But they're more vibes based than they are anything else.
I think that's a fair description. Like, again, The only con we've been to that I really enjoyed, both opening and closing, was CalziCon.
Mm-hmm.
And that was largely just because the vibes of that con were just really, really nice.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're enjoying the vibes of the con, opening and closing can be a pretty cool thing for that. Other than that, they're kind of there as stuff, and they also don't tend to be very consistent about when they have them. And they also obviously tend to have them at times when not a lot of people are at the con, because opening tends to be pretty early on Friday or sometimes even on Thursday, and closing tends to be
pretty close to the last thing on Sunday.
Yeah.
But yeah. So at this point, I think
we're also just at home.
Yeah, we are pulling it off the highway and into our town now.
So also, as you're leaving the con, maybe just to talk about that really quick, like leaving or going home for the weekend. Get gas the night before if you can.
Yep.
Make sure that you have everything with you when you leave.
Yep.
I would say on the way back, you can maybe do what we're doing if you're with a friend or somebody. Talk over the con, what you liked, what you didn't like. Yep. And I also think you should make a decision about whether or not you want to go back to that con.
Mm-hmm. Like again, do we want to briefly decide whether we would go back to the Pet Expo? I think I would say if there wasn't anything better on.
Yeah, pretty much. Like this was a more minor event, so it was more minor in terms of our minds of what it was supposed to be able to do. What do you think, Emma? You are the final decider. Think she liked it?
Yeah, I think she wants the treats that we got her.
Yeah, don't say that yet. So next week we'll be back with a new con whose name I'm still learning to pronounce, so hopefully I know what it is by then. But it's the closest con to us, only 45 minutes away, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting and fun. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and we hope that if you are potentially planning to attend a convention in the future, this was good and useful advice for you. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.